Three big Australian names from three very different worlds. Good evening and welcome to another edition of Chris Smith and Friends. Tonight, a feisty federal politician who has declared her own personal war on China. Senator Sen Fierravanti-Wells, 15 years in Parliament and proud of her record standing up for migrant Australians. Joining the Senator, academic, prolific author and emeritus professor Prof Fitzgerald, the smartest man in the room on history, politics, sport and even the booze. And making up our trio, the Lambassador of Australia, the politically incorrect Sam Kekovich. He starred in the VFL, then taught us how to love lamb and our country. You know it makes sense.
There's nothing worse than being un-Australian. I should know. I've been Australian all my life. And I'm sickened by the creeping tide of un-Australianism eroding our great traditions. Like our custom of eating lamb on Australia Day. Un-Australianism is everywhere. For example, people wearing those plastic brightly coloured flip-flop shoes with flowers on them. What's wrong with rubber thongs in simple primary colours? And if I hear another person say thong when they mean those swimming costumes punchy Brazilian blokes wear up their bums, I'll do my block.
I'd hate to think what kind of sledging Sam Kekovich got away with as a superstar at North Melbourne in the 70s. If it's anything like the nationalistic fervour he dishes out in the media, and just before Australia Day, no wonder the opposition crumbled. Sam calls a spade a front-end loader, and he joins us tonight with a few targets to shoot at. My fellow Australian, Sam Kekovich, g'day.
G'day, Chris. What an epiphany. Great to hear from you, mate.
It's good to have you on the program. Let me guess, it's been your consumption of lamb in recent months that has kept the virus at bay from the Kekovich household?
Oh, look, I'll be implicitly candid with you. It has been a contributing factor, but there's also been a couple of associated ones as well. I've been trying to keep up to speed with some of these pearls of wisdom that our great leaders have bestowed upon us, like the lockdown and why we still are. Lockdown when our medicos tell us that everything's A-OK. And you've got to question the motives behind the reasoning behind it, whether it's politically driven or egotistically driven. But if our medico gurus find it laced with a tinge of ambiguity, how do mere laymen like you and I possibly interpret it?
Correct. So confusing. I didn't know Dan Andrews was a doctor and Anastasia Palaszczuk was a professor. But anyway.
Well, mate, I don't like to draw a division or to polarise, but as you well know over the years, the evidence has been very compelling about our leaders. They wear size 10 Stetsons and have willies of inverse proportions. And unfortunately, we don't have those leaders anymore.
Now, tell me, how have you got on with the wife while you've been locked down this long?
Oh, look, we have just dovetailed beautifully. Although I must confess it's got to be testy towards the latter part of this, how would you term it, hiatus.
Crises?
Yeah, whatever. Well, I wouldn't quite put it in the crisis compartment, but anyhow. The other day I got to be testy and I said to her, I ran out of tarmac and I said to her quite bluntly, a little bit brutal, or truculent I guess, but I said, why don't you go in the spare room and address some of your mistakes? So she came straight to me and gave me a big hug. Now, it took me a while to interpret that, but I believe I might be part of the problem, not the solution.
Yes, exactly. Let's rewind the tape, Sam, to the halcyon days of Kekovich and what was it, 228 goals for the Roos?
Well, Chris, the one common denominator that was prevalent then, as you well know, is Australia was a great country. You know, the two words that best depicted the spirit and the essence of our wonderful nation is what? Fair dinkum.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know whether that prevails, that's part of our lexicon anymore, when you consider, you know, all these splinter groups and minorities that are pushing their own agendas. We used to come together as a group, we were all one, and somehow we used to have sensible dialogue and discourse, and we'd work out a wonderful resolution. These days, if you've got a view contrary to the, you know, the inner city progressives or the left-wing bullies or whoever they may be, you all of a sudden, you know, you're xenophobic, you're homophobic, you know, you're a racist. You know, where did all these Martians emanate from? These technocrats, these pseudo-intellects, you know, who are trying to validate and legitimise their very own existence by impinging themselves on these inane crusades that have evolved out of nowhere. So back in the day when I did strut the turf, it was fair dinkum, because if you copped the whack, you, depending upon who dished it out, and if it was someone that was quite capable of going on with you, you sort of held it back a little while till you got a better opportunity. Yeah. Or if someone you could deal with on the spur of the moment, you let go. But regardless, you'd put your duke out and you'd have a convivial over the drip tray afterwards, and all would be forgotten.
Very true.
Where have we heard? But I'll tell you something, and it's so evident. Once you compromise your values and your standards, and we've seen it through political life, the Gillard, the Rudd years. You want to get in the bed with independents, you want to get in the bed with the Greens, you want to be a bit of everything to everyone. Let me tell you, why don't you just turn the light out, walk out the door, pack up your caravan and drift off into the sunset?
It's very true,
We need some
Sam.
genuine leadership.
Once you lose your identity, once you lose what drives your moral compass, when you lose all of that, you've got nothing left.
Well, you are. You're just morally bankrupt, mate. You know, you can win lotto overnight and be a multi-millionaire, but it's no good to you.
No, exactly. Now, tell me, when you were playing for the Roos, go back to those days. Tell me a little bit about your sledging techniques, because I reckon you'd be a beauty.
Now, look, you can keep this to yourself. I don't know our viewing audience might be making a cup of tea now. I rarely sledged, for the simple reason I had the knack of finding the pill fairly regularly. It was the ones that were chasing me in pursuit that were sledging me. I know, look, every now and again I used to cut loose verbally, but I wasn't, I had a fairly good grasp of the Queen's English. And a lot of those that I was sledging wouldn't even know how to interpret it. But look, in those days, let me tell you...
Sorry, I wanted to know, were you also an outspoken player in the sheds? Would you be driving the team? Because you're pretty good, on the microphone.
Oh, no, look, this is not really me, mate. I've just overnight manufactured myself. No. Look, I'll tell you something about what really infuriates me. I know where I think I know where you're heading. We need to linguistically emancipate ourselves. The freedom of speech. These technocrats who have suppressed our freedom of speech. Let me tell you, the greatest asset we have in this country is our level of irreverence.
Yeah.
Now, if I call someone, a wog, or, God, that's a good-looking Sheila, it's not being disparaging, denigrating, defaming or defiling. It's almost a term of endearment. And it's not the content, it's the tone in which it is said that is terribly important. Now, I grew up with a surname Kekovich. As you probably figured out, the derivative is not Anglo-Saxon. It's got a European connotation, and going through school in the 50s and 60s, I was subject to a fair bit of slander. But you know what? We had a bit of wit and a bit of humour and common sense. And, sticks and stones will break my bones, but names never hurt me. And my parents became leaders in their community. They couldn't speak the language. They became proud Australians. And that's what we all are. But, these people that want to polarise and segregate for their own personal agenda, whatever that is a disgrace. We are Australians, and remember, we lost 80,000 at the Somme, the Western Front and Gallipoli for the privilege of living in this wonderful, wonderful democracy.
Well,
so let's hope when we come out the other end, we recognise and be very grateful.
You finished your career and all of a sudden you're exploding on the radio, various radio stations up until this very day. And then, out of the blue, of all media companies to invite you on, the ABC got you on the Fat. How did that come about?
Well, the ABC then were a fairly robust, resilient organisation. And their charter was very clear, I should say. And not only that, to their eternal credit, they adhered to it. Yeah. And that was promoting local talent and disseminating their wonderful ideologue throughout country Australia. They were the pulse and the heart of the rural sector, and they did a great job then. But somewhere along the line, they want to become political. They became political animals. They were anti-conservative. They got inundated with commos or whatever, I got no idea. And their complete charter changed dramatically. So it was a privilege to work with the ABC, and they gave me a wonderful opportunity. And they tutored you very, very well.
Yeah. It's interesting. How do you think you'd go today on a similar nighttime program?
I'd be the top-rating man on the ABC. I'd be everyone's friend there. I'd be out the door in 3 seconds. I'd be out the door in 3 seconds.
Correct.
In fact, I wouldn't even terminate. I wouldn't even get a pay termination, I reckon. I wouldn't last 1 second, mate. Those vacuous, flaccid. Look, where you could go all over the place. It's just ridiculous.
You could. And
annoying.
We've seen this during COVID-19, Sam, where the public is trying to get the message through to their politicians. We want our jobs back. We want to keep working. We don't want our boss to lose it and his livelihood to crash, because that means we crash. But it doesn't get through the thick heads of those who have really no skin in the game because they're paid by the public.
It's a rhetorical question. You're right.
Yeah.
You've almost answered yourself. But the futile thing is, look, we've wasted billions of dollars in this country band-aiding. We never have the hard discourse or the sensible dialogue to find a resolution. All we do is we throw dollars at every minority that has an agenda. We throw dollars to appease them until it gets to a crescendo and a boiling point, and we've got nowhere to move. This country needs genuine, hard-nosed leadership. And let me tell you, the minute someone does bob up, the masses will flock to them and follow them. We've lost 10 or 15 years of unprecedented prosperity in this country through the resource sector. But the boardrooms of Australia were complacent. They did nothing. They sat on their derrieres, they didn't want to buck the system, and all of a sudden all that wonderful wealth that we could have stored or built, institutions, we could have built schools, medicals. Look, it's mind-boggling what we could have done with the right form of leadership. So, look, I'm still optimistic, because when we come out of this, anything we've learnt is we need to philosophically change. We don't need more money. We don't need more work. We need to philosophically change and remember what made this country great and why we are Australians. And remember, good manners, there's no substitute. Yes, sir, thank you, and roll up your sleeves and put in an effort, and not become well, we don't want to be off here immediately, Chris, but, we need to be Australian, for want of a better term.
That is a perfect segue, Sam Kekovich, to your Lambassadorship, of course, for the Meat and Livestock Association. It's been a long partnership, hasn't it?
Been a long, fruitful one over 16 years. We're still doing it. I'm still part of the Meat and Livestock. They do a fantastic job. Country Australia, the rural sector, mate, is fantastic. Let me tell you, if you ever want a copy of what it is to be Australian, go for a drive in the bush and talk to a farmer who, in great adversity, has just with great passion, dignity and pride continued. No whinging. They don't want a handout. They just want a fair day's pay and to be recognised. And we have let them down badly. But hopefully, it's just around the corner when we do recognise all that. They're our true champions. The volunteers, the farmers, not these B-grade celebrities that we genuflect over and the Hollywoods of the world, who all of a sudden are guru on climate change. They want to get rid of our brummeries up in the Dargo High Plains. Oh, look, we could go on for hours. Chris, you want to get rid of me, you've got to go to a commercial break, do you?
No, we won't go to a commercial break just yet. But I want to remind our viewers of your incredible ads for the Meat and Livestock Corporation.
My fellow Australians, after 10 years as Lambassador fighting un-Australianism, I'm taking a step back. After all, I don't want to linger on like a skivvy-wearing children's entertainer. So now you must educate the new generation about the perils of a lambless life. Teaching a tot to love lamb is the most pressing duty of every Aussie parent, like you, sir. If you don't have sprogs of your own, then teach someone else's how it's done. Because we want these little cherubs to grow up big and strong to fight un-Australianism. Tofu? If we'd argued less about Gonski and talk more about Chomsky, our nation's future would look much brighter. Don't be un-Australian. Teach those little ankle biters to be chop munchers. Barbecue lamb on Australia Day and show them how it's done. You know it makes sense? I'm Sam Kekovich.
The vegans, they came after you, Sam, didn't they?
They did, but they were poorly. Their strategy was very poor. If they were genuinely concerned, they wouldn't have impinged themselves, have the temerity of impinging themselves on my coattails. They would have somehow got together and created their own campaign. But no, they thought it was better by just slandering the incumbent, which is just stupid. But as you know, I'm not anti-vegan. We all know a balanced diet has vegetables.
Yeah.
I'm all for it. But to have the audacity to suggest that lamb is no good, take away the livelihoods of Australian farmers who diligently roll up their sleeves with great passion in rain, hail or shine and do a fantastic job feeding us, let me tell you, that is just tantamount to high treason.
And in more recent years, Sam, they've sort of gotten away from criticising you for supporting lamb, which you have every right to do, and it's a very noble cause, and we should support our lamb growers and our produce. But now they're sort of having a go at you about your association with Australia Day. Is there nothing that we can treat as sacred and our own anymore?
Forget about the politics of Australia Day. Australia Day is a wonderful catalyst where we can all come together regardless of colour, culture or creed, forget our differences and rejoice living in the best country on the planet. So doff your fedora, put your mitt out and shake hands with your neighbour and put a lamb cutlet on the barbie or a lamb chop or cook a lamb roast or whatever. But forget about the politics and when who landed and what they did. You know, let's work towards a better Australia. Every nation has got a dark spot. We're no different. But I think they would be far better off served if they generated all their energies into making a contribution and making this country more livable.
You are on fire. Stay right where you are, Sam Kekovich, because after the break, Senator Fierravanti-Wells on Julie Bishop, China and our sovereignty. Don't go away.
This is the plan for a COVID-safe Australia.
First, with exclusive details.
About a major rejigging of our economy.
It's fast becoming the ultimate nanny state here for premiers on a power trip.
Big stories break.
This is a crucial meeting for the National Cabinet.
There will be risks, there will be challenges.
Sky News is there first.
More now on the breaking news. 12 people have been injured after a car crashed into a shop.
Live and unrivaled.
We've been fighting the virus and we are winning.
Sky News Australia.
Right now, knowing where you stand financially is more important than ever.
But with so many different benefits, rebates and concessions, it can be confusing.
That's why there's Benefits Finder in your CommBank app. In seconds, we can help you find the benefits you may be eligible for.
It's just one of the ways we're doing more things for more people. Together.
Building, renovating, extending, Carpet Call has you covered for all of your flooring and blinds needs. There's carpet, timber, laminate, hybrid, vinyl, rugs and even made-to-order shutters and blinds for every situation. And at Carpet Call, there's no middleman, just great flooring. So call Carpet Call for Australia's largest supplier of floor coverings at Australia's best prices. Call Carpet Call, we're the experts in the trade.
The experts in the trade.
Harvey Norman bonus deals across a huge range of electrical products plus 60 months interest free. Get bonus delivery and tabletop installation on all 2020 65-inch TVs and larger. Plus buy a soundbar in the same transaction and we'll install that as well. Bonus delivery on selected washer and dryer packs. Bonus delivery on all LG French door fridges. Don't miss out. Bonus deals across a huge range of electrical products plus 60 months interest free. Shop in our spacious stores or shop online. But hurry. Bonus deals end Tuesday at Harvey Norman.
Go!
Right now, businesses are doing whatever they can to take care of their business and their staff, and that's why many are choosing to expand online. But taking your business online can be tricky, and that's where CommBank e-commerce solutions come in.
CommBank helped me sell my products online securely, so people can enjoy my restaurants in their living rooms.
We're here to help businesses get up and running online so they can stay up and running.
And we can, together.
You can't say this. Or this.
Does my bum look big in this?
That takes the focus off your face.
And definitely not that.
I thought that was really funny.
What happened to the Aussie larrikin?
It's cruel to tell people what you can and can't laugh at.
Comedy is in a lot of trouble.
A special TV event, June 16.
Larrikinism has always been about taking the mickey.
Take a check on yourself kind of thing. Free speech is critical.
From Kerry-Ann Kennelly to Vince Sorrenti.
Comics aren't the problem. Comics are the solution.
And Delphine Delaney.
That was never malicious. It was good-natured.
Sky News Australia presents the death of the Aussie larrikin.
Chill out, people. It's going to be okay.
Expert analysis.
As with everything, the headline numbers don't tell the full story. They never do.
Intelligent insights.
It's so important to know what you're looking at and looking for.
Honest opinions.
Wherever the government turns, there are big issues with long-term ramifications.
5 nights of Peter Credlin.
Some good news stories too, I promise you that. That is amazing. We all need a laugh and some good news at the moment.
6 o'clock, weeknights.
Well, you don't survive for 15 years in Australian politics without standing up to the critics and making a real difference. And Senator Sen Fierravanti-Wells has done all that, and more recently has chosen to take on a superpower, the Republic of China. Her scathing assessments have received worldwide coverage, and she's not taking a step backwards. Conchetta, a great pleasure to have you on the program.
Hi, Chris.
Very intimidating talking to Conchetta.
Conchetta, how has hygiene and the testing regime been like at Parliament House? Are they taking your temperature when you walk into the building?
Well, they're not taking our temperature, but there certainly are these 2-litre bottles of hand sanitizer. Look, we've adapted like other workforces have had to adapt. I'm sorry that Parliament perhaps hasn't met as often as it could have. Certainly my committee, and I'm chair of Senate Committee on Delegated Legislation, we've continued to meet and we've continued to carry on our business by teleconference. But look, like all other workplaces, we've had to adapt and with the appropriate social distancing, and it's been happening. Democracy has continued, Chris.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, but I think personally you are probably more suited to a lockdown than most politicians because, as I understand it, you can make your own clothes, you can cook like a champion, you can grow food, you are totally sustainable, all because of the great leadership from your mother, Antonia, right?
Absolutely, Chris. And we've had a bit of that since we've been in lockdown, I have to say. Having said all of that, I have to give credit to John, my husband, retired naval officer, who's very good at doing all sorts of things at home, and he cooks as well, but he certainly shares the cooking with me.
And I understand in your background, going back to your mother's influence and your father, Giuseppe, he wanted you to be a doctor, didn't he?
He did. He wanted me to be a doctor, and when I said to him that I wanted to be a lawyer, he wasn't very happy about that. And then, of course, when I did study law and then eventually went into politics, look, they were wonderful. They were very, very supportive. It certainly was different for them. They were migrants to this country. My dad came out in 1953, my mother in 1959 from a small village in southern Italy. So the prospect of their daughter going into politics certainly was different, but it was something that I wanted to do from a very early age. I was 17 when I decided that I wanted to go into public life, and I worked very, very hard to achieve that, and without my parents' support and without their sacrifices, I could not have done what I did.
And what was the reaction from your friends at the time? 17 years of age, girls, I'm going to be a politician.
That was very interesting. I remember vividly we were at St Mary's College in Wollongong, and we're all standing around as girls normally chat, and what are you going to do? And I said, well, one day I'm going to be a politician, and everybody laughed. And I must say that laughter rang in my ears for many, many years. I am still the only politician to come out of St Mary's College, and I'm very, very proud of my origins in Port Kembla. It's certainly,
You know, when I went to school, Chris, I didn't speak a word of English. Italian is my first language, and so I learned English at school. I learned other languages along the way. But again, I'm very proud of where I came from. I'm very proud of my origins, and I'm very proud of those values that my parents instilled into me: faith, family, hard work.
Sam, have you ever been offered to get into politics because you'd be a wonderful Conservative politician?
Come va, Concetta?
Molto bene, Sam.
Molto bene, yes. So vediamo dopo. Sorry, Chris, we're having a bit of a...
Is this SBS?
Bit of Italian, just... Now, if I may just digress for a moment, Chris, you're glowing in your praise of Concetta's versatility around the house and the cooking and so forth. What gives you the impression that we can't multitask?
Because you're a bloke. Sorry. Sorry.
No, you've summed it up beautifully, let me assure you. Have I had the opportunity to go into politics? Sorry, Concetta.
I was just going to say, can I assure you, Sam, that lamb is very much a feature in the Fierravanti and Fierravanti-Wells household, and Wells household.
I realise that, and I do know a lot about your origin in the southern parts of Italy. I've been through there a couple of times. Lovely, lovely place. In fact, Italy's a lovely place. I've got a lot of Italian friends. But like your parents and my parents, they were migrants. They couldn't speak the language, but they adapted, blessed with the opportunity, and made the most of it. Anyhow, apropos to your question, Chris, have I ever been...
Yes, please.
I have, but I've got to tell you, it'd be futile me going into Parliament unless I could lead the party. You know, the notion of sitting on a backbench or as a minister would drive me insane dealing with fools. I'm not suggesting they're all fools, but let me tell you, Concetta's a great example of some real deal politicians. But for every Concetta in the building, let me tell you, I'd name you a dozen that, outside of propping themselves up on a backbench, couldn't cut in the private sector. That might be a bit harsh.
That's interesting, Concetta. Have you felt that frustration in the Senate and wishing that at least for one 24-hour period you could actually run the Parliament?
Oh, very, very interesting question, Chris.
Oh, Concetta, stop sitting on the fence.
Look, I'm in the
Senate.
Senate. I'm in the Senate. Look, the reality is, Chris, that regrettably, honesty and forthrightness in politics is something that we haven't seen as much, and I think Sam was alluding to that earlier in his comments.
I think it's an oxymoron, the word you're seeking.
I've certainly been honest and forthright in my comments, and regrettably, as a consequence of what I've said, in particular in relation to my comments about the communist regime, I was hung out to dry. Often, when you do speak your mind, it can be uncomfortable. It can be uncomfortable for Prime Ministers, it can be uncomfortable for ministers, but that is the importance of political life. You do have to express your point of view. I'm a conviction politician,
yes.
And you know, as Maggie Thatcher, someone who I very much have looked up to. I don't want to be a consensus politician. I want to be a conviction politician. And in the end, I can honestly say that I have followed the mantra of staying true to my values and beliefs. And often people with whom I've interacted who may not agree with my point of view, but I hope that in the end will say, well, at least she was prepared to stand up for her convictions, for her values and beliefs, even if it was against the flow. But I do know, Chris, that my views and many of the things that I have said are the views of the silent majority of this country. And I see it in what they write to me, what they say to me, and often, you know, I might even get stopped in the street and people say to me, thank you for saying what I believe in and having the courage to actually say that.
Yeah, I love hearing this because you were on the right track
yes.
with your criticism of China, and this is where we have to re-evaluate, don't we, Concetta, exactly what sort of relationship we want to have with a power that calls us the dog of the United States. We shouldn't cop that stuff.
Absolutely, Chris. And the reality was that when I gave my warnings back in 2018, I saw it firsthand. I travelled extensively in the Pacific. So I saw what was happening firsthand. I gave those warnings. I gave the appropriate warnings. I gave the appropriate briefings when I came back. But the reality was that the message that I was talking about and the warnings that I was given, people didn't want to hear that. The preference was by those that were leading our foreign policy and those people who were doing business with the communist regime. They were very happy to turn the Nelson blind eye.
And you're referring to Julie Bishop here, aren't you?
I'm referring to a whole range of people.
Including Julie Bishop?
Including Julie, including others who basically hung me out to dry because I had dared say what was obvious, what was happening and what has been happening for so long. Now, this started an international debate, but the reality is that that sense of appeasement, that framework of appeasement just continued because the rivers of gold were flowing. Well, the time has come now for us to assess, not just in words, but in deeds. Do we want to continue to put a third of our exports and 26.4% of our two-way trade in one basket? We can't continue to do that. You have to change. It cannot be business as usual after the pandemic is over.
Sam, you don't need to be a psychiatrist, you don't even need to be a politician to read between the lines of what China has done. They have defended themselves too aggressively. They are hiding something in reference to how this virus began. Would you agree?
Chris, my parents escaped war-torn Europe because of Nazism and communism. Let me tell you, if you ever need further evidence or compelling evidence, just ask Sri Lanka what's happened to them. When they got the rivers of gold off China and they thought they would develop their bases or their shipping and turned it into military bases. You know, Conchetta's so right on the ball here. It is just the scourge of our society, and it's not the Chinese people. The Chinese people are beautiful people, but the despotic Communist Party are tyrants and they're to be shied away from. And let me tell you, Conchetta, you're a wonderful visionary to have raised that in 2018 because the writing is on the wall. And you only have to see what they've done, you know, during the pandemic. They even had the temerity of going to Montenegro, where we came from, and delivered medical supplies there. Now, as you know, Yugoslavia, or as the old Yugoslavia, is a very important military base. And the Yanks have been there for eons. Now, let me tell you, that wonderful concession that the Communist Party are granting to Montenegro and parts of Yugoslavia and Slovenia and the Balkan region, let me tell you, there will come a time when they're knocking on the door and sort of playing some war games right at their doorstep. So it's to be avoided at all costs.
Yeah, you wouldn't put it past them. I want to pick up on what would be one of the most dramatic periods of your political life, Conchetta, which was the toppling of Malcolm Turnbull. I can only begin to think about what kind of experience that 48 hours was.
Well, Chris, in light of the Westminster tradition, when I voted against the Prime Minister, it was incumbent on me to resign, not tender but to actually tender my resignation, not offer my resignation, as regrettably most of my colleagues did. And so I tendered my letter of resignation, in which I actually did refer to those concerns that I had had over the period. And that included, most especially, we'd gone through the period of the same-sex marriage, and I know that that had very much affected the Liberal Party, and most especially my Conservative base in the Liberal Party, the issues pertinent to China. But I also made it very clear that I strongly believed that if Malcolm had Peter Dutton as his deputy, then I believe that he would have stayed on as Prime Minister and probably gone on to win the election. Now, I have always prided myself on giving an honest opinion, and I gave Malcolm that opinion, and indeed it's actually there in black and white in my letter of resignation.
How did he react?
Well...
Not well.
The rest is history.
It sure is. I want to talk to you about your basketball prowess and compare it to Sam Kekovich's AFL prowess. So we'll do that right after the break. Don't go anywhere. The emeritus professor, who's usually the smartest man in the room, is next. His name is Ross Fitzgerald. Look forward to having his company after the break.
He's hanging up his headphones.
I will be retiring from radio.
But he's not giving up the mic.
He loves his audience and he likes nothing better than helping them.
Australia's most recognisable voice.
It's time to speak up. You either believe in the bush or you don't.
Will still be right here.
You've been the fiercest advocate.
For everyone you have lifted up, thank you very much, mate. Sky News is only going to get better and better and better.
Tuesdays and Wednesdays on Sky News Australia.
On-trend hybrid flooring has the durability needed for busy Aussie homes. Right now at Solomon's, our all-new ranges of hybrid flooring start from just $48 per square metre. Solomon's, on style, on value, on now.
There's magic in a Solomon store.
RSPCA, for all creatures, great and small.
I'm on this forward path, I'm focused, no job, no man. Oh, this sounds bad, but it's actually really good. It's good vibes only.
The new season of Insecure. Watch now on demand.
Looking for new ways to entertain yourself at home?
Yes.
Well, here's a few ideas.
We do things a little bit differently.
Dance like nobody's watching.
Relax and enjoy it. #Orcs.
Sing your heart out.
I'm scared.
Embrace your wild side.
Do the gardening naked on Sundays. It's super fun.
We'll show you how it's done.
Start getting excited.
The new series of Michael McIntyre's Big Show starts next Sunday, 7:30 on UK TV.
What happened to the Aussie larrikin?
It's cruel to tell people what you can and can't laugh at.
Comedy is in a lot of trouble.
A special TV event, June 16.
Larrikinism has always been about taking the mickey.
Take a check on yourself.
Call it as it is. Have a laugh.
Sky News Australia presents the death of the Aussie larrikin. Real news when you need it most with Sky News Australia.
All of us are facing a dramatically changed world.
On Sky News Live,
Right across the country, businesses are feeling the strain.
trusted coverage of the coronavirus crisis.
We're telling you what's actually happening.
And now, a brand new service, Sky News COVID-19 on Channel 604. Stay informed around the clock with Sky News Live and Sky News COVID-19.
Welcome back. Emeritus Professor Ross Fitzgerald doesn't do things by halves. He's an outstanding world-class academic. He's written more than 40 books, has an exceptional political mind, and he's also been sober for 50 years and even found time to stand for politics as a member of the Sex Party. Ross Fitzgerald, so glad to have you on the virtual couch this evening.
It's a pleasure to talk with you, Chris.
Now, can I just ask you a question about the Sex Party first? I wanted to get that over and done with and out of the way. What possessed you to run as a candidate for the Sex Party?
Well, the Sex Party's founder, Fiona Patten, they've now changed its name to the Reason Party. She and her partner, Robbie Swan, and I were good friends, and a lot of their policies I agreed with. So I was the lead Senate candidate in New South Wales. We nearly pipped Fred Nile and the Christian Democrats. We came close, but we didn't get up, as the Bishop said to the actress.
I'd just like to know what the policy base was. What was your platform for entry?
Especially freedom of speech, freedom of expression, the fact that churches should pay taxes. But it's really it was really a free speech party, and I've for years, for decades, been a strong believer, like Slamming Sam, in freedom of speech, freedom of expression.
Well, you should have named it freedom of speech, Professor. It would have got over the line.
Indeed. I tried to tell them that the sex party really would lose a few people just because of its name.
A modicum of sex wouldn't go astray.
Enough, you blokes. Now, Ross, as an oracle of politics and history, haven't we had a most astonishing 4 months in this country and the world?
Indeed. And also, some of you may remember that on the Alan Jones show, I was one of almost the only political commentator that said I thought Scott Morrison could win. But certainly, it's been unprecedented in terms of global politics. The situation is actually worse than it was in the Great Depression, and it's a testimony to fellow Australians that we've done so well here, and to the policies that Scott Morrison has put in place.
But it wasn't long ago, Ross, where he was very much on the nose, and now you wouldn't catch him with a 10-foot pole in the news poll.
That's right. I mean, he didn't perform particularly well during the fires crisis, but he certainly has behaved in a brilliant way, I think, in terms of COVID-19.
Concetta, who would have ever thought that a Conservative Party would be paying Australians that amount of money to not work in about 3 different ways?
Well, Chris, I think as we come through this and come out of this, there are 2 questions that will be need to be answered. One is, will the cure be worse than the disease? And secondly, I think that ultimately when all the payments and all of those things cease, for many Australians who've lost their jobs, who've lost their livelihoods, whose health has been affected and a whole range of other things, what are they going to be saying? And will they ultimately then look to somebody to blame? Because human nature is such that we always try and blame someone else. And unfortunately, whether the government and consequently Scott Morrison will be blamed for that. I always think back, you know, don't forget Winston Churchill won the war, but he lost the election.
Yeah.
So as we come through this, I think there's a sobering thought here, and that is ultimately we will be going into recession, it's highly likely, and so therefore there'll be a lot of Australians who are hurting and who ultimately will want to blame somebody for their circumstances, and so that's how I think now we are going to be going through that period and towards that period.
And talking of sobering thoughts, Chris, Australia Day is very important for me, not least because on Australia Day 1970 I became free of alcohol and other drugs, and as you mentioned, I'm over 50 years sober now, which means that...
How did you manage that, though? How did you manage that?
Through Alcoholics Anonymous. I couldn't do it on my own. I was a bit like Lord Byron, bad, mad and dangerous to know. But I had a glimmer of hope. Somebody suggested that I went to Alcoholics Anonymous, which I did in Cleveland. I came back here to Australia and got sober here in Sydney, and I still go to 2 or 3 AA meetings a week. These days I go to a couple of online meetings, but the most important fact about myself is that today I haven't needed to drink or use drugs, and that I've stayed close to Alcoholics Anonymous, which is by far the most successful agency in dealing with addictions.
Sam, I could think of a lot of footballers, not just in Victoria, who could do with a bit of sobriety throughout their football career. I'm not referring to you.
Oh, look, I think it was more prevalent in my day than ever. I mean to say it was fairly well concealed because the level of scrutiny was nowhere near as rife. But certainly, when you consider the lifestyle, you know, being cocooned and you know, depression setting in, probably imbibing in a little tincture here and there won't go astray, but it ultimately is, as we all know, it can lead to more critical circumstances. But certainly it is a scourge in our society and something that we need to address.
Ross, you haven't had a very nice year at all, apart from the fact that we've all withstood so much pressure and anxiety with viruses and bushfires, etc., etc. You lost your wife this year, Lyndall,
yes,
and you're extraordinarily close.
Yeah, well, my darling wife and I, Lyndall Moore, we were 43 years married on Guy Fawkes Day. Barry Humphries introduced us on Guy Fawkes Day 1974, and we were friends after that. Guy Fawkes Day 1975, we became lovers, and Guy Fawkes Day 1976, we got married. And it's actually it's about 4 months since Lyndall died on January the 22nd, and I'm absolutely bereft without her. And although my latest book, which is called 50 Years Sober, An Alcoholic's Journey, is dedicated to Lyndall, and most people don't know, but from the very day that Barry Humphries introduced us, Lyndall stopped drinking as well, so she was over 45 years sober when she died, but not many people knew that. Indeed, not many people knew that she was married to me because she kept her name as Lyndall Moore. She was Australian Model of the Year in 1969 and 1970. So, and she was living with one of the richest men in Australia. So she went from diamonds to boiled lollies when she teamed up with me.
You were punching above your weight, Ross.
Indeed. Well, one of the reasons that we got on so well is that I had no idea who she was. So she knew that I loved her for herself, not because of her fame.
Conchetta, I want to ask you about the Parliament today. With all of this, I guess, uncertainty about the future, and you talk about the fact that will scrutiny be placed on Scott Morrison for what he's done, we forget very quickly. We're very fickle, aren't we, the Australian electorate?
Sure.
We are, and I remember when I first started involvement in political life in the early 90s when I worked for Jim Carlton. Politics then and politics now are very different, and through the Howard years, and I think at some stage Mr Howard may actually have mentioned this, that you had a traditional left base, a traditional conservative base, and then you had the group in the middle. Well, the group in the middle now is a lot wider than it used to be. So like many other things in life that have become quick, disposable, so politics has gone through this, and I think that very much now when you look at polls, and polls are not reflecting what people are actually thinking. People are getting their news from different mediums, and of course, whilst some people want to criticise Donald Trump for tweeting, I mean, let's not forget that Winston Churchill used the radio, JFK used the television, and Donald Trump is using Twitter. And so therefore people are getting their news from their own mediums and in less public ways, so therefore they're happier to keep their thoughts and views to themselves. And I go back to the point that I made before about the silent majority in this country, and the silent majority in this country cannot be underestimated in terms of where they put their support and when they turn away from a government for various reasons.
Ross, you know the history here. In decades gone by, maybe beyond 50 years, we had people with jobs who would go and represent their area as a politician. And so when it looked like as if they were going to lose power, they'd simply go off into the sunset and back to their jobs. But nowadays, because it's a full-time job, they will fight tooth and nail and execute their best friend to remain in Parliament and remain in government.
I mean, sadly, that's increasingly true in the last 20 years in particular, because a lot of, if not most, parliamentarians have had very little experience in the real world, very little experience of farms, as has already been mentioned.
I think, Ross, that's a very good point. You've got the experience base of the political class of, say, even 2 decades ago was a lot more diverse than what it is today, and regrettably that has diluted, as you correctly said, the experience base, but most importantly life experience. And life experience is vitally important. You have to have gone through the difficult times to appreciate and to understand how your decisions and what you do in Parliament affects the lives of ordinary Australians. And if you haven't lived the highs and the lows, then it's very difficult to have to resonate and to understand, particularly where you do have such diversity in our society. And that, I think, is one of the failings. Although I have to say, I was sitting back thinking here, I wonder what the Senate would have looked like with both Sam Kekovich and Ross Fitzgerald sitting in the Senate, and myself, of course. It would have been very interesting.
Sam, if I may be so bold, pardon my intrusion here, but look, you look at most politicians, they've all been spawned from the legal fraternity or from the union sector, but very few of them have actually, you know, put their own money and built something and created something and, you know, as Ross rightly alluded to, grew a farm or worked somewhere like that. And apropos of silent majority, might I also add, history has been a very, very poor tutor to us. We've learned very, very little. You talk about the days of Mao Zedong, talk about the days of Hitler, you talk about the days of Stalin. All those three despots ruled over less than 10 or 15% of the entire population, yet they rose to tyrannical powers because of the silent majority.
Yeah, very interesting. Ross, you're very good at forecasting where this country will be because of your view of history is often a roadmap for that. Where will we be? Where will we be in, say, 12 months' time after this pandemic?
Well, I'm hoping that things will radically have changed. Having been sober for over half a century, I'm very taken by how the pandemic here in Australia has unleashed or released forces of fellowship throughout local communities that mirrors or echoes the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, working together, mutual aid, live and let live. And I very much hope that when the virus is vanquished, that those qualities of local fellowship will come to the fore. There's going to be a whole lot of different changes. It looks like that there will only be about 25% of people working in the central business districts of most cities. That's going to produce a radical change, and I'm hoping that local fellowships in the local community will continue to grow and to prosper, as they have. There's plenty of examples of mutual aid and acts of mutual kindness, and above all, of being in this together, and tolerance of differences, and live and let live.
I think you're quite right. Conchetta, you would be looking forward to just getting on the netball court, wouldn't you?
Ah, yes. Well, I used to be the goal shooter for the parliamentary netball team. Yes, but unfortunately, as a consequence of two falls, one where I did a lot of damage to my right wrist, and then the year after to my left, I think my netball days are over. So, unfortunately, but I did enjoy playing for the parliamentary netball team. Perhaps in time I may go back.
You'll come back. There'll be a comeback of sorts. And finally, Sam Kekovich, you'd be looking forward to just getting on the road and travelling Australia and talking about what's on your mind as you normally do.
I am indeed. But I thought it was very aptly put before the fellowship, and, you know, over the preceding 3 or 4 months we've seen unprecedented levels of courage, dignity, pride, compassion, love, care, all those wonderful intangible qualities that have been sadly missed. And there is a greater concentration on what I can do and what I can give, as opposed to me, me, me.
You might be interested to know, Sam, that my dear old dad played over 100 games for Collingwood Seconds, and never played for the firsts, because this is during the time when Collingwood won 4 premierships in a row. And my dad captained Collingwood seconds for about 4 seasons. So I'm
Which surprises
very
me
much
where
missing.
You do. It surprises me greatly how you've acquired that magnificent amount of grey matter coming from a Collingwood background. But anyhow, look...
That's where we'll...
No, I don't...
I've got to...
I didn't mean that disrespectfully.
You mob the shin boners for nothing.
Enough. Thank you so much, Ross Fitzgerald, Sen Fierravanti-Wells and Sam Kekovich. Great to have you, 3 of you, on the program.
Thanks very
much.
much.
Vediamo, Concetta.
Arrivederci. Alla prossima.
Arrivederci.
What a trio with an amazing array of life experience. Next week on Chris Smith and Friends. That Hanson woman, yes, her, Pauline, plus the former ABC man who now wants it privatised, and the world-famous chef with very little to cook at the moment. I hope you can join us then. Enjoy the week ahead, including a bit of real sport. This is Chris Smith. Good night.